Gentlemen, if we are following our podcast release schedule according to plan, I believe this episode will be hitting our listeners' ears right around September. So if we are following the plan, it is now September. There is a chill nip in the air. One could be forgiven for donning a wool sweater and reaching for a mug of hot cider. And the college season, the fall semester, is in full swing, which means that those who pay for college, parents, guardians, grandparents, or any other potential payor, might be wondering what exactly is the best way to fund an education. And those who do not yet have children in college are probably wondering the same thing, knowing that the time that their kids may be hitting college is swiftly approaching. Thankfully, we have an article up on the Baypoint site all about one potential solution to that problem. This episode is brought to you by the numbers 529. That, of course, refers to the 529 College Savings Plan. And dear listeners, joining me to discuss that plan are my stalwart castmates, Jim Kintaski and Jake Sadler, partners of Baypoint Wealth. Both Jim joining from Annapolis and Jake joining from Asheville. Took me a second. I had to remember the name. I can't believe I forgot the name Asheville there for a second. I've only been doing this podcast for 9 episodes. But how are we doing today?
We're doing great. I'm a little chilly, I guess. I mean, I guess if there's a nip in the air in September,
there's a nip.
I would rather avoid that. I would rather avoid that.
Well, it's grab the denim, the denim jacket, because it's chilly, if not frigid out there.
I think we'd be changing the whole vibe of our podcast if we all started wearing denim jackets or wool sweaters. So,
well, Jim and I were talking before the show that we should have worn our college gear, like alma mater stuff.
That we should have done.
Unfortunately, I think the only piece of apparel I have from my time at William & Mary is a William & Mary softball t-shirt. That isn't mine. I don't know how I ended up with it. I think it might have been one of my roommates, but I've had it for years, but I never bought it, and I was not on the softball team.
I think I might have an ETSU, that is East Tennessee State University t-shirt laying around, but I'd have to dig it up.
Jim, what's the ETSU mascot?
That's a Buccaneer.
Go Buccaneers. Go Bucks.
Let's go Bucks. That's right.
Shout out to the Bucks.
The mountain, the hillbilly Buccaneers, East Tennessee State. I've never talked from Appalachian State. And now that you actually mentioned it, Zach, I don't even think I have an Appalachian State t-shirt. So
once we get Appalachian State University to sponsor our show, we'll have, I'm sure, more than enough.
Yeah,
more than enough gear.
So Appalachian State's mascot should be the hillbilly or the Mountaineers. So
Mountaineers.
And what you don't know, Zach, is that the Buccaneers and the Mountaineers are rivals, and they were definitely rivals when I was in college. We were both I was still both in the Southern Conference.
No, not anymore. Things have gotten shaken up a little bit, so not in the same conference anymore.
Yeah, well,
I didn't know that.
Age-old rivals, me and Jim.
Right over the mountains.
Since time immemorial, I'm sure. But for those hopefuls listening who envision themselves at Appalachian State University or East Tennessee State University or William & Mary or any college not listed on this program, do we have a show for you? And to start us off, Jim, since you wrote the article about 529s currently on our site, I'm wondering if you could just give us the lay of the land a little bit. What is a 529 account and why might you want one?
Yeah, I'll do what I can, Zach. A 529 account is a plan set up individually by each state that is designed to allow people, parents, grandparents, kids save for college education. And there are some really good tax benefits that go along with these accounts that make them very useful in terms of saving and increasing your chance of having the ability to actually pay for these higher education costs. So in a nutshell, they're saving vehicles geared towards education.
Great. And one of the Jim's laughing. Jim's laughing. I think I need to work on my segues. Apparently, great isn't doing it.
Oh,
Frank it made me feel like I didn't do enough there. So
No, it
well,
wasn't great. I wouldn't have said great. I want the listeners and viewers to know that was a non-facetious great. That wasn't great with an asterisk. I thought that was a great definition.
I'm anxiously awaiting. I'm anxiously awaiting the all the advantages from the tax perspective. So they're tax advantaged accounts designed specifically for saving for college, for education expenses. But yeah, Jim, I'm ready to hear about all the tax advantages.
That was good. That was going to be my my second question. I wanted you to walk us through the tax advantages, both on the side of those contributing and those on the side of those receiving.
Yeah, so there are really two main tax advantages. One is that for most plans or some plans, when you make a contribution to the plan, you get a state tax deduction on your current tax return. So, for example, if you contribute $2,500 to the Maryland 529 plan, investment plan, or prepaid plan, which we can discuss later, you get that deduction on your personal tax return. So you have $100,000 of income that is reduced by $2,500 income tax deduction, and that in Maryland that may save you $375, and then you can that's per account. So then you can do an account for yourself. I mean, not for yourself. You can do an account for your child. Your spouse can do an account for your child, and theoretically, your child can do an account for your child, and so you can add those up and get multiple deductions for that year. So a lot of people end up with a $5,000 tax deduction because them and their spouse contributed to a 529 plan for their child. The bigger tax benefit is once you put that money into the account, so you put that money, $2,500 into the 529 plan, that money, assuming it's used for college expenses, grows tax-free. So that $2,500 turns into $25,000. You use it for education. You do not pay any tax on that appreciation. So you get tax-free income, essentially of $22,000, which can be a pretty hefty savings there, if you're in a high ordinary income tax bracket.
Yeah, I want to sort of pause on that for a moment because that's pretty rare within the sort of constellation of accounts available to investors in general, where there is such an account that you get the deduction up front and the tax-free growth on the back end. That's really does not happen that often.
Yeah, it doesn't happen that often. And again, it's a state tax deduction, so it's not a federal tax deduction. So the value isn't as great, but there are some that appreciation, especially if you start early. When you first have a child and you have that account for 18 years, that can really add up, and that can be a really significant savings, which can then go towards your education costs, which are significant.
I did a little research here before our call. It looks like about 34 states across the nation do offer some form of state-level tax deduction for contributions to the 529 plans. Whether, there are some differences in rules, and Jim, I don't know if you're going to go into this a little bit, but it may depend on which 529 plan you open. So in North Carolina, I think as an example, North Carolina does not offer a state-level income tax deduction for contributions to any 529, including the North Carolina-sponsored 529. And so some states will offer that deduction or partial deduction, but only if you contribute to the 529 plan sponsored by the state in which you reside and pay taxes. Some states do offer a tax deduction for contribution to any state's 529. I think Arizona and Kansas is two examples. They do kind of offer that deduction for contribution to any state. But in a lot of states, you do have to make the contribution to a plan sponsored by the state in which you live.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jake. It doesn't mean you can't contribute to other states' plans. It just means that you may not be able to get the tax deduction. So I could actually contribute to it being in Maryland. I could contribute to a North Carolina 529 plan, but I wouldn't get the Maryland tax deduction up front for that. I would still get the tax-free growth, assuming my child went to school and they were qualified education expenses, but I would not get that $2,500 tax deduction for contributing to a North Carolina plan. It's really good.
And so, I mean, at least for us in North Carolina, the conversation can be a little bit different where, okay, we're paying North Carolina income taxes, but if we're contributing to 529, we're not getting this great deduction for doing that. So we can pick from any state's 529 plan. Which one do we choose from? How do we begin to pick that? So, as far as kind of the criteria that we use for assessing, okay, which state's 529 plan makes the most sense, we do want to look at the fees. So the administrative fees that the plan itself may charge. Some states don't have administrative fees. Some states have higher administrative fees. We also want to understand what the investment choices are going to look like in any given state's 529 plan. So kind of like a 401k plan where you most likely have a menu of set choices from which you can select for your investment mix. Most states have a predefined menu of investments from which you can choose and how to allocate the money in the account. So if you don't have the benefit of the tax deduction, then typically we're looking at, okay, what are the administrative fees and what are the investment choices as kind of what's guiding us for a selection for another state's 529 plan.
And I'm glad you, Jake. I'm glad you brought that up because I think absent the state deduction for a resident of any given state contributing to their state's own proprietary plan, that's a sort of a nagging question. Well, you have 50 options. Which one would you choose? So then it really does become sort of a question of doing a bit of homework either by yourself or with your financial planner as to what state is offering either a more compelling fee structure or a greater suite of compelling investment options. And I wanted to sort of pick your brains a little bit here on what kind of assets can be held in a 529 plan. What do those investment vehicles look like?
The investment vehicles specifically themselves are mutual funds for the most part. I don't know of any plans that allow for any individual stocks or anything like that, but like Jake mentioned, there's typically like a 401k, there's a menu of different investment options. In a lot of the cases with these plans, they're what is called enrollment-based investment options. So the plan themselves will sort of act as the investment manager, and they'll say, look, your child is 1 year old. They're going to be 18. They're going to go to college at 18. And so you have about an 18-year time horizon. So that would lead to a more aggressive portfolio because you have a longer time horizon. So what the investment companies do, and in Maryland, for example, it's T. Rowe Price, they'll design a portfolio that's, aggressive for a 1 year old, and they might have 90% stocks in it and 10% bonds in it. And then over time, as your child gets closer to that education age of college, 18 or 19 or whatever it is, that portfolio changes over time. So it becomes more conservative. And so when you're ready to go to school, you don't have a lot of risk. The market doesn't have a terrible 6-month period. And all of a sudden you went from having $100,000 in your account to having $70,000 in your account. So it's sort of this automated process that will go from aggressive to conservative and just sort of do it for you. There are other options, obviously, within I shouldn't say obviously, but a lot of the plans do allow for other options such as picking individual funds. And then they will allow you to just do like what's called a static portfolio where you purchase an aggressive portfolio and it stays aggressive for the entire time frame. And maybe Jay can touch on some reasons about why you might pick one or the other, like a age-based versus a static portfolio.
Man, that's a really good point on those investment choices that you have available. It's going to depend on the plan again, and the state that's sponsoring and what they offer, and what it offers from 1 year to the next can change. So, the investments may be kind of supported by one, investment company 1 year, and then the state plan decides to make a change over to a new menu of choices. But like Jim said, the most common thing that we see are these age-based funds where you select, your child's matriculation date or year, and then everything that you put into the account gets invested in that fund. And they're usually very well diversified. And like Jim was describing, they have this kind of glide path, if you will, in the mix of the investments that you own within just that one choice. And that mix of investments changes as you get closer to needing to spend the money. So getting more conservative, as Jim was pointing out. I think in some cases, it can make sense to kind of customize, if you will, if the plan allows it, and just kind of select a handful of different choices, kind of manage, your own allocation, or select that static allocation and just let it ride. And I think for folks that are diversifying their funding sources, so they have a 529 plan, but they also have, say, an after-tax, brokerage account that they're also earmarking for education. I think in those types of instances, that's where, something like a static allocation or kind of managing your own allocation can make a little bit more sense. But I think in large part, those age-based funds do a really good job of kind of taking some of that market risk out as the beneficiary student gets closer to needing money.
Yeah, and it also takes, the effort and the person hours necessary to manage the investments out of it. If you're taking, the age-based fund, or if the plan refers to it as a target date fund, I think there's often a little bit of anxiety on the part of, the parents, guardians, grandparents, whomever is funding this education, that, they're nervous about, managing the investments themselves, when, they're in reality, there's a suite of options that will really do it for them. And if there are, fee differences within the different fund options, a lot of the time you're going to see the investment management, the fund's investment management reflected in that slightly higher fee. But for that fee, you get the peace of mind of not having to revisit it every 6 months, every year, to make sure you're still allocated appropriately for your child's age.
And then I think
Well, I was just going to say that.
something.
Yeah, no. I was just going to say that there are like what they call broker sold plans. Where you can hire a broker that actually gets paid, and you can what's at the College America plan, I think it's called, and they can in theory manage your money for you. But with this, if you're really targeted to a specific goal, I really like those age-based portfolios because they help you achieve that goal. And you don't need a whole lot of active management or rebalancing or tax management in those accounts because they're specific for that goal. So that's all I was going to add, Jake, was, there are ways to get really specific and have a manager manage them, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of value in it with the 529 plans.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I was going to add to those age-based plans, I think they do serve as kind of a nice kind of consumer protection for folks that are beginning to save for college, but their child is, say, they're 10 or 11 or 12. They're only a relatively few years out from potentially needing that money, and I think the inclination may be, okay, we're in a position maybe ready to save for college at this point in time. We really want to kind of maximize the tax-free growth in the 529 plan. So we want to go much more aggressive to try to do that in a shorter period of time. But those age-based plans are going to be getting naturally more conservative, taking some of that market risk out as the student beneficiary is getting closer to needing it. So I think it just kind of, highlights a little bit of the dynamic of the 529 plan. If you can get your contributions in earlier with more runway of time before potentially needing that money for higher education expenses, then the greater the likelihood you'll be able to take advantage of that tax-free growth without having to really go overboard in the, aggressiveness of the portfolio.
One thing that I've heard, at this point on a number of occasions from a number of different clients, and Jim, Jake, I'm not sure if this experience reflects yours as well. You'll get clients who are, parents of young children, maybe newborn, maybe a few years old, who they themselves went to college, and they don't want to see their child, if their child goes to college, to be saddled with significant student debt. but they're also not sure if their child is going to go to college at all. And I feel like, in the past few years, there's been a bit of a sea change in thinking about the necessity of college to live, a good and fruitful and financially healthy life. It seems as though, whether or not it's true, it seems as though there is changing consumer and investor thinking on whether college is the linchpin of success. So I'll hear them say, what if my child doesn't go to college and yet we have $100,000 earmarked for college? What can we do with that money?
Zach, that's so interesting. I actually have felt the same way. We've been hearing that a little bit more, and it's just probably a small sample size that we have, but I'm hearing that more and more in the conversations we're having with clients is that, hey, what if my child doesn't go to college? Is this at risk? And there are some downsides. We've been talking about the positives, but there are some downsides to the 529 plan. If you do put that money in there and your child does not use it for education, or you want to use it for your own purposes, you run into a jam or something like that, you then would have to pay tax on that growth. So that $2,500 that turned into $25,000 all of a sudden becomes taxable. And in addition, those earnings, that difference there, gets hit with a 10% tax penalty. So you could put yourself in a situation if you don't use it for education. There are some taxes there. But again, these plans are pretty flexible in that you can pass them on to future generations. You can pass them on to additional beneficiaries. So Jake probably can comment on this too, but like if there's multiple children in a family, we might suggest, hey, let's overfund a little bit for the older child. If they don't use it, maybe we can pass it down to the younger child and use it for them. So you don't get caught in a jam where you have some tax and some penalties on it.
Yeah, that's a really great strategy for that concern, Zach, that you were mentioning, and it's one we definitely are. I'm hearing it more and more, especially from younger clients with growing families, young kids. What if college isn't the return on investment for that 4-year undergraduate degree isn't there? What if they decide to do something else? Does the 529 limiting in any way? And it can be limiting. One way that it has become more flexible, since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is that you can now use up to $10,000 per year for K through 12 qualified education expenses. So you kind of think of private school tuition as one potential use. That's new. So we could also see other forms of flexibility kind of written into the tax law in the future. But right now, still the money's come out for qualified education expenses, and that concern, okay, what if college isn't something we want to do? Should we really be saving in a 529? Jim, that strategy, if you have, multiple children, kind of overfunding or fully funding for that first student, and if they don't use up everything, you can kind of roll it on to other beneficiaries. Another strategy is capping the number of years that you plan to fund per student in the 529. So say, for example, 2 years worth of your potential expenses per child funded in a 529 with the remainder funded in another type of vehicle, typically just an after-tax brokerage account with an allocation that's managed for the objective. So, I think we're kind of beginning to get a little bit more creative in terms of, how we can continue to utilize 529s, capture the benefit that's available, but also take into account the uncertainty around needing the money in the 529s for those higher education expenses.
Yeah, just to highlight some of the other, currently legal allowances and flexibilities contained within the 529 legislation. I believe there's also, I'm not sure if it's $10,000 as well, but there's also, I believe, a carve out for trade schools and apprenticeships when it comes to using the money in a tax-free way. And I also want to say there's a $10,000 lifetime allowance for distribution to go towards a currently existing student debt. I'm not sure what it is about the number 10,000 and student debt repayment, but it seems to be mimetic of some sort.
Make sure we research that afterwards and post a modification to this.
Well, fact check. Well, I think another thing worth pointing out in terms of flexibility for 529s, and it kind of as part of that concern, what if we don't use the money? I think one of the ways a lot of parents or even grandparents are thinking about it, okay, what if our child, student beneficiary gets a scholarship? And they don't need as much as we've saved in the 529 plan. There is a bit of a carve out in those 529 plan rules. So if your student beneficiary does receive a qualified scholarship, then you can take out the amount of that scholarship from the 529 without those penalties that Jim was referring to there.
Yeah, and since we're talking about benefits, I don't know if we want to go down this path or not, but there's some estate planning benefits that you can get out of these things too. And if you're in a position where you're trying to minimize your estate tax, and it's not really applicable to a lot of people now because the estate tax exemptions are pretty high, but you're allowed to overfund these plans. So if you sort of forget about that annual state tax deduction, you can actually contribute. What is it? 5 years or 10 years of? It's 5 years. 5 years of gifts. You could put this $16,000 times 5 into this plan, and that's a big chunk of money that goes into the 529 plan. And the reason why I'm putting this out is because it's excluded from your estate. So if you pass away and you die, it's not included in your estate tax calculation. But the other really cool piece about this is if you're a grandparent or you're somebody funding these accounts, you don't lose control of the money. And that's really important a lot of times when making this decision is, me as a parent, and we've been talking about this decision, whether kids are going to go to school or you're going to need it, you can get that money back. We don't recommend that you start putting it in here and you try and go get it back. But if you ever run into a financial situation where you need it, it's not a gift that's gone forever. You can get the money back. You just may have to pay taxes on it at some point in time. So there's some estate planning benefits to it. And then again, you don't actually lose control of the money once you put it in there.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, there's a reason why we're talking about 529 plans here today, and we're not really bringing into the conversation the other types of traditionally thought of education savings vehicles, like the Coverdell account or UGMA account, custodial account for children, or, double E, U.S. savings bonds, anything of that nature. The 529 plans have really important characteristics that have really, I think, in more recent years, overshadowed and kind of dominated that college savings strategy. And a lot of these other older strategies have kind of fallen out of favor when you compare the kind of benefits that you get to the 529. Retention of ownership is central to, I think, those benefits when you compare a 529 plan, say, to a custodial type of account. So you can fund the account for the benefit of someone else, but you retain ownership and control of those assets. The tax benefits that we're talking about, the flexibility that is already present and could potentially grow in the future for how the money is used. And even most recently, for grandparents that would like to fund a portion of their or all of their, grandchild's education, in the past, certain rules around financial aid applications had made it somewhat more favorable for grandparents in some cases to gift their children money so that the children could put the money into a 529 plan that they owned and had control over. But very recent changes that actually go into effect in October of this year, affecting, calendar year for students, 2023, 2024, will actually change the way grandparent-owned 529 plans factor into the financial aid calculation, and really becomes much more favorable, I think, for grandparents to consider owning the 529 plans that they're using for their grandchildren, because they do, just like you were saying, Jim, retain ownership and control of those assets if they need them.
How are we doing
Right.
on time, Zach?
We are pretty much just at time, unless but I wanna leave room, unless there's some burning 529 knowledge that you want to share.
Believe it or not, I actually have some more burning 529 knowledge.
Let's do it.
I never thought we'd get through 30 minutes talking about these 529 plans, but here we are. And
here we go. Podcast overtime.
I was going to add to this mix, and I'll do it kind of fast, is we've been talking about a lot of the investment strategies with these plans and putting money and having grow. There is another option to the 529 plan. So the 529 plan is is the general title. And then there's an investment plan where you put your money in there and it grows based on the investments you choose. But then there's also a prepaid plan, which tends to get overlooked a lot, where you put your money into the plan and you essentially guarantee that the tuition for that state that you put it in will be paid for in the future. So you're essentially, your return that you're getting is essentially the cost of inflation, the cost of education, in the future. And so it's a way to sort of take out the market risk and not have to worry about the markets, and you just put your money in there and then you get your tuition back in the future. So prepaid plans are an option. A lot of times we recommend doing, because you can only fund the prepaid plans up to tuition. So we say, hey, fund the prepaid plan. If you want to do more, then you put it in the investment plan. So I just wanted to add that there are two different types of plans, and the prepaid, like we did today, often gets overlooked, but it's a pretty good option.
Well, and I think that just really dovetails well with really my only other thought around this entire topic, which is just the cost of college expenses. So, if we look at kind of national averages for, public 4-year institutions, we're looking at currently about $25,000 per year for tuition, room, board, and expenses fees. That, kind of everything all in. Jim's got the Virginia Tech come out, so I think he may have some firsthand experience of, these average costs. It's gone up over the past 40 years over 200%. So the cost for, a 4-year degree. We certainly have an expectation, just for planning purposes, that costs will continue to increase, and they'll continue to increase at a slightly higher rate than just base inflation. So I think, Jim, you kind of brought into the mix, those prepaid plans is one way to kind of navigate, the future costs of higher education and the inflation aspect there. And I think it's very relevant to just point out, okay, what are the current averages today, and how have these costs increased over time? Whether or not a 529 plan is the right fit for any individual is really up to their circumstance and their preference. It's not right for everyone. But I think for a lot of folks, it can serve as certainly a nice piece of that funding puzzle if funding higher education is a priority.
And we are going to leave it there. I was joined by Jake Sadler and Jim Kentowski, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.